welcome to another episode of the Data for Food 2030 podcast. In today's episode, I'm really happy to welcome Harald Sundmaeker, who is in charge of the Data for Food 2030 case studies, and together we will discuss everything about them. Harald, thank you very much for joining our podcast today, and of course, welcome.
Thank you very much, Nefili. It's a pleasure of being here and definitely to talk about data for food. Yes.
Great. So to start, as I mentioned earlier, you're leading the work on the Data for Food 2030 case studies. Can you briefly explain your role within the project and how these case studies fit into the project?
Yes, thank you very much for asking. So my role is to lead more or less the collaboration of the case studies, which are teams spread in Europe. And they are focusing on their topics. And what we want to do is in the larger project to learn from those case studies, what they are doing, what are their challenges. And therefore my role is a kind of facilitator, helping them to, let's say, facilitate collaboration also with other teams which are there working on the other topics. And therefore it's a very interesting task also to learn from those different stakeholders, what are their interests, how they are working, and also connecting them also to teams in the project.
Thank you very much for this introduction. And can you give us an overview of these case studies and the types of food systems, data and technologies that they look at?
Yeah, it's in the Data for Food project, we have 9 case studies. And those 9 case studies are addressing different dimensions. And that was also our purpose, to have the possibility to look at different perspectives in the food system. So we are, on the one hand, have the dimension of the food supply chain itself, that we are starting on the one hand really at the production side, about food production, and also the food chain, how food is coming from the producers towards the consumers. And finally also looking more at the circularity perspective, so not just saying okay, we have just a linear chain, but also looking that yes, definitely it's a network in the food system, a network of many stakeholders, and therefore we have case studies which are then also addressing different topics and how they can use the data, present the data, and because a lot is about data. In data, the name is already saying so.
Of course.
And therefore we are asking all the case studies which data is there, who has a need for data, what can we do with this data, and not just in a single organization, because yes, definitely also in agri-food, data is also key to make something, to realize your processes, to improve, to on the one hand to look for production, but also to optimize your processes. However, we are also looking here about the data exchange between organizations, which is quite a challenge, definitely, and therefore we think it's really a nice collection of case studies that we can really learn on how this data is exchanged. And that's really this perspective on, yes, on the one hand on the supply chain, as well as the different perspectives we want to achieve here. Is it a short chain? Is it a longer chain? Which are really the stakeholders which are collaborating. Therefore, we have with those 9 case studies, you can imagine 9 case studies like being in a matrix, and every, let's say, point in this matrix has a different purpose on how they are addressing challenges in this topic towards the data exchange.
They cover a lot of perspectives, a lot of dimensions, a lot of sectors,
yeah,
and the whole value chain, as I understand from what you're mentioning.
Yeah, exactly. We are like, when we're looking, for instance, at the Finnish team, they are working on the grain chain, and what they are calling it a premium grain chain. They are also asking themselves how they can also provide more information on the grain, how this information can add value to the, let's say, the use, the processing, to the purpose. So they're investing that. Then other information is on the pig value chain, how they're sharing the information from producers towards, let's say, the processors, or even as we saw also on data intermediaries, how data intermediaries are using data, that they can facilitate the data exchange, also even up to the machinery, how machinery and farm management information system, how the data is coming from point A to point B, and even then how information is then exchanged with external systems, and what does it mean, and what if I'm owning the data, if I'm the originator, I'm holding the access rights to the data, how can I influence to the access to this data? Because possibly I have my own interest there, saying, well, with those stakeholders I would like to share the data, with those not. How am I organizing this? But then other case studies up to the retail, where the retailers are looking for sustainability related information. That is also very interesting, more or less even from the different perspectives. Now I said from the first perspective, how data is coming from the farm side. But then also we have different perspectives that retailers have an interest what they can do with, or even then we have the case on the Amsterdam municipality, where they are also looking on waste data.
Yes, another very important aspect, waste management, waste data.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that is also a discussion we're having. What's the purpose of accessing this data? Also, we have, let's say, those topics on circularity, where we are thinking when we are transporting, for instance, fruits and vegetables, what can we do with the data? Because we know we all know the produce itself, it's not a piece of metal which won't change the properties. Yes, the shelf life is limited, more or less, depending on the produce. But also there the question is, how can we exchange the data, that we can schedule the supply chain in itself, that we are aware what is the status of the food, and what are really the potentials we can exploit to avoid food loss, food waste, and also explain also to the consumer itself. Like we have a case on Mallorca, where there's also the idea to involve the tourist sector, also to bring together agri-food, the supplier of food, and finally also to think what are new ways towards sustainable tourism. Therefore you have also involved the dimension of hotels, restaurants, yes, and catering, and how we are bringing those things together. It's also quite exciting to learn about information. Even there, tourists are interviewed. Also, there's this connection, even the feedback from the consumer back to the food producers themselves, that also they can learn from that. And I think this is always, we are often looking in the supply chain more from the producer to the retail, to the consumer. But I think it's also the question, how can we bring back the information from consumers to the producers to learn.
Let me ask you a quick question,
yes,
based on what you said. How can we actually use all this data? How can we make them have value and purpose for us, for everyone?
Yeah, that is definitely a very good question, and it's definitely a lot of complexity. And we see also here in the food chain, I think we have some easy chains. If you're, for instance, looking on direct supply of fruits and vegetables, well, it's from the field, it's packed in boxes, it's brought to retail, on markets, to consumers. And that is a very clear case. You can provide information. Also, the consumer can learn what is about sustainability, where the food is coming from, what are with such food, the ingredients are quite clear, but possibly also what is the farming practices. Then it starts, and there we have, for instance, also a case in the Czech Republic, where they are also asking themselves, how can they bring information to the consumer towards about farmer markets, about where such food is coming from, also even processed food, because they're also very small processors, and then how to collect that information. And anyway, as soon as we are getting now at the more and more processed food, then you're adding, of course, also not just the challenge of exchanging information between the organizations, but then you're also discussing how are you really connecting the information inside my organization. Then we have a doubled complexity, which is definitely, when we're looking specifically at food, which are possibly not so long chains, that's then this, I would say, real challenge on how we are really connecting this information, even having in mind that the food chain also has a lot of varying supply. As we all know, we have different weather, different temperatures, and I need also to change my suppliers very often in principle. And that is also, again, a challenge of change communication channels. It's, I think, both, and therefore, I think that's also, let's say, topics we are addressing here in the Data for Food project. How can I manage such challenges in different ways?
Thank you very, very much for your answer. And now let me take you back to the case studies I mentioned. The case studies span different countries and sector. Why was this diversity so important for understanding the data economy for food system? This inclusion, this covering all these perspectives.
Yes, of course. We would have loved to even cover more dimensions, say it like this. However, with those 9 case studies, at least we tried to have a collection also of different produce and also different countries, because it's also very clear that we have different type of supply chains towards the consumer. Like I'm coming from Bremen in northern Germany. As you can imagine, Bremen in the January, so there's not a lot production outside going on. So we need to have a lot of suppliers, for instance, from Spain, from Greece, from Italy. And therefore, we have also the different types of agricultural production. So even the size of farms when we're looking at different countries. As if you're looking at the general statistics from the European Union, that's quite different. The type of, how machinery is used. And these are all perspectives which are definitely also influencing the availability of data. The more of technology I have, possibly I also have the more on data available and more easy also to make use of such data. And that was also here. Let's say the idea, we have Finland, we have the Netherlands, we have Belgium, we have France, started with that, then Spain, so many different countries, just to give some examples, which are involved in our case studies, and where we definitely can say that also the background of the production is a little bit different. And as I said before, also different type of supply chains, and that is what I said also in Czech, where more the farmers are. Then in Mallorca, where we have production of olives, for instance, and then also the Netherlands, where they're also thinking more even up to the municipality. So quite different dimensions where we try to make this, what I said in the beginning, the matrix. Of course, it would have been nice to have even a larger matrix, to have different dimensions, but of course, the sky's the limit always.
Sure. And what kind of criteria were used to select all these case studies? And what makes them particularly relevant for Europe's agri-food transition?
Yeah, thank you for asking. So we are, even in the preparation of this project, we were sitting together with the core team and then asking ourselves, so what shall we look at? And then we also, there's a huge network of contacts we are also having to this core team, and then asking ourselves, so whom to ask? And then more or less we made a call for potential case studies, and we collected quite a number of possible case studies, and we're really sitting together in the preparation and the setup of this project to ask ourselves, how can we puzzle all this together? How can we find, let's say, a collection, and how this even, where could be even, let's say, connections between case studies, because it's not just single case studies themselves.
Yeah, they're not isolated, they're also connected.
Exactly. Even we have the cases from Slovenia and Finland, which are now working on the so-called rule book and how to design such chains, how to design data exchange. So, and also the question is always, we are asking ourselves, because it's not just those 9 case studies we have here, it's not just that they are solving their problems, but what is really at the very end of the problem will be the takeaway. What also others can learn, how we can, and that I see this also as a role of me, myself. Of course, it's not just myself. We are a team on also supporting this work, and where we are asking ourselves how we can learn from this work, that we can, what can we present to the outside world, and what would be the questions, so what is working, but also what is not working. So also to help others to avoid pitfalls and to show, yes, they reached this objective, they were realizing such information exchange by this way, or this was the way how they involved the stakeholders. And I think that is the interesting part also to other people outside there.
And when comparing all these case studies, do you find that they have anything in common, or did any unexpected insights emerge during all these comparison and the complementarity that they have through each other?
Yeah, and thank you very much for that. I think, yes, definitely. You have a lot of aspects when we are talking about technology, if you're talking about the let's say, the general enablers, also the general challenges. We see always how to involve stakeholders, how to really convince people about the added value of sharing data, and or which kind of technology is, even what I said before, is not just to the agri-food sector, like the tourism data space, how also they can exchange information even with a different field of different sector, or also with manufacturers of equipment. This is kind of the manufacturing world of vehicles, that to which degree also such equipment needs to support this data exchange. At the same time, if they are anyway gathering data, to which degree also this data can be then possibly used for also from now towards an external target audience, how they can use this data for improving their machinery, for instance. So I think there are a lot of connections, and even most recently also insights. We were focusing on the data exchange, we were focusing on the data economy, and we were not so much looking on artificial intelligence, because we first wanted to understand how we can really make this data available. But also now in the project is already quite some time active, and also now several colleagues were coming up with the challenges on how we can then really exploit the data, how can we facilitate the access to data. And finally, we even started a working group where different case studies are sitting now together. How can we make use of artificial intelligence?
Which is a very important aspect these days.
Yes, definitely. And also how to facilitate all the access to the huge amount of data, because which is at the very end then the next, let's say, part. It's not just the isolated perspective on the data spaces.
Thank you very, very much for your answer. And now, what do these examples reveal about the real benefits and perhaps limitations, which are always there, of using data in food systems?
Yes, when looking at the data we're having, the question is always, what can you do? What can you make out of it? And we are also in discussion with different case studies where they even said, yes, they are also now looking, okay, they can exchange now this data, but will really the behavior, for instance, in trade of produce, will this really change to the availability of data? To which degree, if you have some real-time information concerning the status of some food, will really somebody use it for new kind of planning and control of the supply chain, of transport, for instance, of storage, or will just, let's say, the practices. So we're talking about a food system which is well established. We are all, let's say, fed every day. There's plenty of food in our supermarket. So it's, as we see, it's working. But definitely we are now trying to see how we can improve it. And still there's this discussion on how much effort I need to invest to gather data, to exchange data, and what's the added value. And that is really still a challenge, because yes, it's complex, there are many stakeholders, and even the question is now, where I need to, on the one hand, handle the technology, where I need to change organization, where I need to have all this governance aspects, and that is still something what we are also trying to share. Then, what is the takeaway from those case studies and what the others can learn?
Of course, and now that the case studies and the project has matured, and now we're approaching the final phase.
Yeah.
How are these case studies evolving? I mean, you mentioned that they're interacting with each other, but what are we expecting as a next step for all these case studies?
Yeah, we are now, the project is 9 months to last now. So the final phase definitely of the project. And what we did now is we had the 9 case studies, what I said, metrics, 9 case studies, and we identified now specific topics which are, let's say, spanning different case studies, and we are now in so-called working groups where we are asking ourselves, yes, if I as a case study have a certain takeaway, how can I share it with others? And we are also using ourselves as a kind of, well, can we already share this outcome of our work already with the colleagues inside the project? Because that's the first, let's say, try. Well, if we have something in common, we can share it, we can learn from each other, then the probability is also very high that others outside of the project can learn from this effort. And that is really an interesting exercise, and it's started very well now. We established at the moment for working groups where the different combinations of case studies are now working together, for instance, on the supply chain. What are the key, let's say, elements when produce is forwarded through the supply chain we shall look at. So we were looking on what are joint interests, what are challenges, and then finally also to say, so what shall we do together in the last 9 months of the project to facilitate, let's say, the presentation of this takeaway.
Great. So as I understand, despite the fact that they're working on different sectors and different dimensions and different aspects in general, they're kind of all connected to each other and use data, exchange data through one another and learn from best practices and lessons learned among each other, and they support each other's vision in a way.
Yeah, I think it's, of course, on the one hand, even that it's manageable. We have clear teams which are caring for the case studies, and they're very, let's say, known teams. They are working very well together already over the overall time of the project. And now also this dimension comes where they are also seeing, okay, what are we doing, how you are doing it, and even about data intermediaries. Also, that was an opportunity. We said, like the Belgium and the Finnish team. We're also now looking 2 different data intermediaries, which have more the national perspective, where even the Belgium team was looking with data exchange with France, farm management information system, and then also how they can exchange data over borders, over countries. And that is also a very interesting dimension, which is also going then, let's say, to have an outside dimension from the individual case studies and connecting really the work of the case studies, for instance, for such topics, which is also really an opportunity we're having here in Data for Food.
Sure. And now one final question before we finish our discussion for today. What is the main takeaway for our listeners about the value of real-life examples in creating better and data-driven and, of course, sustainable food systems?
Yes, definitely. When we're having there, for instance, the example with the sustainability data provided to retailers, I think that's a very clear information where not just the retailer, but also the consumer finally can learn about the sustainability of the food. Then what I said before about the Mallorca case, where also tourism data is used, that also the farmers can learn where are the tourists from, where they are staying, how this is done, or in Slovenia the case also about how they are, where the food is coming from, how they are presenting the food in online shops, in distribution, or even in the Czech Republic on the marketplaces. That I also learn as a consumer, well, from which markets are there, which events are there, that I have also added value information for very small producers, really bringing, let's say, both sides together. Then that is a very, let's say, interesting side we're having here. And there we think that is something, as soon as we're establishing this basic line of data exchange infrastructure, I think step by step by step, we can really facilitate the access on the one hand to the consumer, but also to the different stakeholders, and also to learn what can we do to reduce food waste, what can we do to optimize the supply chains. And these are quite a lot of questions. And then how can we deliver this data also to further exploitation, what I said before, towards analyzing this data with AI, and what is then really the even an extended potential of this data collection. And I think that is really many things are coming then together again, and therefore I think it's a very interesting takeaway we're having on the project.
Yes, thank you very much for sharing all this information with us today, and of course for participating in the podcast and giving us a very nice overview and a very nice example of how these case studies interact and what they're going to achieve at the end of the project. So thank you again very, very much.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure being here and for being able to talk about the case studies, and definitely, and that is definitely to all those which are watching this podcast and would like to know more, please visit us on the webpage. Would be pleasure. Also, if you want to like to know more about the case studies, there are also contact details of the stakeholders and the partners active in the case studies. So also contact us, and would be a pleasure talking to you.
Great.
And thank you
very much. And as for you, dear viewers and listeners, thank you very much for watching, and see you in the next episode.